The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. Welcome back to another episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that can make or break an MSP's reputation, and that is migrations. They often bring stress, sleepless nights, and nervous clients, but they really don't have to. With the right process and the right tools, migrations can actually become one of the most profitable and confidence building services that you offer. Joining me today is Colin Hogg, who's helped thousands of MSPs across the globe simplify migrations, reduce risk, and take ownership of the process. And with that being said, there is Mr. Colin Hogg. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm very well, Dan. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you here on the Stack again.
It is great to have you, and always enjoy having a conversation with you. And we're millions of miles apart, right?
Likewise, yeah. I enjoy having the conversation. We're at least, I suppose I've been completely flipped my time zone since the last time we chatted. But so back here in New Zealand rather than being in Scotland. So
Yeah. So you have helped so many MSPs with the migration process, and we know that these projects are they're not always fun. It's something that they are time consuming, they are nerve wracking, and there's something that you want to make sure that are done right. But with that being said, there are also so many stories, and I'd love for you to share something that's really an unusual or maybe a memorable story that stuck out at you.
Yeah, happy to share one. Probably the one that I'm thinking about that is most memorable was an MSP or a Google partner in the UK who were doing a migration. This migration had been running from memory, about 3 or 4 months, and they were utilizing months.
You said months, right?
I said months. Yeah, these are things that don't normally happen with MoveBot. So yeah, it had been running for 3 or 4 months. They were utilizing a native tool, a free tool. Well, sort of free. Okay. They still were paying for VMs running and so on. So they still had to pay for infrastructure. So nothing's ever free, right?
Right.
They had around about 24, 25 terabytes of data that they were looking to migrate. But at the current rate that was being migrated, it was moving about 3 gig of data a day. Hence the reason it had been running for months. Obviously, right. They're getting frustrated. If you extrapolate that out, they were going to be running for about another 20 years to get this data across. So this is far from an ideal situation. So you're kind of coming into. They came to us. They were looking for alternatives, and they came to us. Obviously they wanted to solve the problem for their client.
Yeah.
And because we're 100% cloud native, they were able to jump in, set up an account, do the connections, and this was a Microsoft to Google migration, probably inverse to what a number of the audience will do, but the point is the same. And they were able to jump in, set up the connections, talk to our support team. Obviously we migrated some data, not a lot, but we didn't want to do that again. And we then sort of worked with them, and over the next 4 days, 4.5 days, I think it was, we then got all our data from Microsoft into Google. So they were obviously delighted, and we're the default tool for migrations going forward. So it's and that was one from about 2-3 years ago, where just being able to help out and develop that solve that problem, and then develop the relationship going forward was fabulous. So yeah.
Well, that definitely hits both those check boxes of unusual and memorable stories. 'Cause, I mean, now
Yeah.
granted, if you were able to bill per hour for that migration over 20 years, I mean, you would only need one client, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, literally the definition of a cash cow, but no, that's
Yeah,
not what you want.
yeah. But I mean, can you imagine going back to the client and saying, you know what, I've got some great news for you. We found a great tool that's going to help us. We're going to get this done in a few days. And boom, there you go. I mean, talk about, turning the direction around, making them happy and, having it be a big win for, you as an MSP. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually took that opportunity and wrote this up as a case study of both that the MSP put out to their customers.
Yeah.
Again, to the point of this podcast, in the sense that it's about MSP should be that source and that professional service that delivers these projects and confidence to do them. So it reinforces their confidence and then us to help them in the delivery and getting a great outcome, ultimately a great outcome for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say are the biggest differences you see between those who consistently nail their migrations and those that usually have some kind of struggle?
I think just knowing what your defined process is, actually sitting down, taking the time to plan things. And the other thing, and I had a call earlier on today, which is in and around clients can be demanding. Clients can
Yeah.
have expectations that are not necessarily achievable, and often things are the expectation is something's going to be instant. Now we can move
Right.
quickly, but it's not necessarily instant. So so I think part of the thing with running a really good migration is actually setting those client expectations, having that honest discussion with them, letting them know you're moving invariably between one platform and another, whether it be an email platform or whether it be a data source platform. There are going to be differences. It's not going to be exactly the same. And actually just taking time to probably explain some of those things, because sometimes some of the client expectations can be quite onerous, and if you present those in a really professional and planned way, then you're ultimately inspiring confidence in the client.
Right.
And sometimes there may be things in terms of timescales that they've set unrealistic expectations in. But if you can cover that off in a really professional way, you do everyone a very positive service by doing so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think having those conversations up front are so critical because, if you wait until there's a problem, then all of a sudden it's just too late. They're going to lose faith in you. If you have those conversations up front and you go over, the two things I always like to go over is number one, what to expect and what could go wrong. Because if you have those conversations and go over what the potential things that could go wrong are, because then they know that things aren't going to necessarily be perfect, and and when there is a problem, at least they can refer back to, what, I remember when you talked about the type of things, the kind of issues that we could run into, and they're more forgiving in those situations. Not, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing, in this process, you're dealing with a number of variables that are completely, that are outside necessarily everyone's control. And whilst we as a tool do a really good job of trying to accommodate most of them, some of them, may be something that needs some manual intervention. And if you've set that expectation up front, there's no surprises. This whole principle of like no surprises, which is what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It really does ensure that a nice outcome at the end of it.
Yeah. Just kind of moving on from that, when you're preparing for a migration, What steps do most successful MSPs take early on, that make a bigger difference later on in the process outside of, just setting those expectations?
Yeah, obviously, set the expectations is number one. The other, probably the main thing is know what your plan is. Have your phased approach planned out. Have that phased approach again communicated. We're going to do this. If it's a data migration, for example, we're going to bring the bulk of the data across. You're still going to remain working in your current platform, and then at some point we'll decide when you're going to do this cutover. At which point we'll run some delta sort of functionality there, and then we'll be able to cut your users across, and you can set that time scale up. Depending on what which comes into this is depending on what your source platform is. Setting the expectation that we may end up hitting some rate limits. So this time scale that we've set, we've added a little bit of extra to accommodate that, and then working. Those are sort of those sort of mechanisms, because sometimes there's a rate limiting in the source, sometimes there's a rate limiting in the destination, depending where you're going. Now, again, there are sometimes areas, you can say we may have to turn off some of the tools that you're currently using to either get the data from or to your destination. I'm particularly referring to Microsoft here, and that's fine. But again, if you've communicated that and set those expectations, you can avoid. We can actually make sure that the migration is a success. So definitely having that plan, explaining what the process is, and getting the bulk across, and then some deltas and then a cutover, for example. And then the other aspect, which is outside of the tools capability, is there's some change management in here. What's the expectation, and having that change management process in place. So if you're coming from a Google environment and Mail, and you're going into a Microsoft environment, what's your change management plan? How are you communicating that with your users? And on that basis, when you're doing your first bit of migration, do a migration with a few test users. Some of the friendly people who will be your ambassadors going forward to help you in that change management process. So you're doing this rather than just jumping in and doing every user at the same time. And then if there's an issue or an error, and instead of it affecting 3 users, it affects 100 users. Because you didn't do the first step of the pilot migration. So generally, always recommend. This what sets the MSPs apart are those ones that take the time and do those little extra steps at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think if you underestimate the power of that testing, you just don't want to miss the boat there, right? I mean, because you want to be able to handle this with a level of confidence so that the client feels good about the process, and just helps prevent those problems as you go along. And I'm sure you guys, you've seen everything. You've seen every possible scenario. And if you have a partner who is going to use your tool and they're doing some kind of a complex project and they've never done before, or maybe they're doing a large project that was nowhere near the scale of what they're doing today, you guys can offer them advice and support and some knowledge on, what to do, and, any kind of additional, tidbits that will help through the process, right?
Absolutely, and that's exactly the scenario we were in. We had a partner that we were working with. They had, they were doing their pilot migration, and there were some unusual outcomes, and they were, the client demanding client. So this is incredibly relevant to this subject today. Very demanding client, a very high profile client, and so they're looking to make sure the client's ultimately happy. And the good thing is, there was lots of communication with us, lots of communication with our support team. As it transpired, there's and there's a lot of these things. There was an action that was taken 6-8 weeks ago that probably caused one of the issues. But by actually having that open communication with us and the team, we're able to say, this is it, and therefore the solution for this is to take these actions, and we can sit alongside in this instance, we're sitting alongside obviously the partner to make sure that that's communicated really nicely, and if required, and probably will in this case because they're a fairly high profile customer, we'll end up in a meeting ultimately with the client just to sort of appease things. But ultimately, that's a scenario where the support team here can actually look at instances, figure out what a problem is, give a sensible and quality reply to that, and ultimately a solution. So that's where we help.
That's awesome. And some MSPs are going to shy away, and I think just maybe because of potentially fear of some of the larger projects, but they'll shy away from doing migrations internally. What would you say to an MSP that's hesitant about taking on their first or maybe their next large scale migration?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say certainly, take our previous advice there about the communications and actually figuring out a plan. But hey, we're always happy to have a conversation and talk through this process with people, and especially there's certainly a number of other tools, and beyond any other tool, which should probably take this approach as well. But talk to us. Migrations don't have to be the big, hairy, scary thing. The process, the tool, the visibility that you have. For example, when you're doing a migration, you expect there to be issues and errors. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should almost be an expectation that within this process, because you're dealing with cloud environments, because you're dealing with API calls, because you're dealing with a host of other elements, there probably will be some issues or errors that will surface. MoveBot by design surfaces all of those issues and are very transparent about them. And the reason that we do that is not to make it scary, but actually in the inverse, it's actually give you the confidence. Okay, there's been an issue or an error here. We have an action. You can rerun these errors, or you can run a delta. That solves 99% of the problems. And from an MSP's perspective, that's really should be quite a confidence providing thing, because by the time you finish your migration, and you have evidence, you have a report you can download to say that we have moved this from here to here, and it's all worked. So don't be scared. Transparency, and actually that visibility, and don't be frightened when you see issues or errors. It's a normal part of a migration. We purposely surface all of those just so that you can then prove that you've got the data where it needs to go.
Yeah, and I mean, that visibility and that reporting does make all the difference in the world. And I think too, if you do have an expectation internally that there's not going to be a problem, and if you're thinking everything's going to be smooth and there is a problem, that's where you're going to get frustrated. So don't set yourself up to think that, we're going to flip a switch and things are going to be perfect. Like you said, during the migrations, there are so many variables and there are going to be hiccups. and to understand that that is going to be part of the process. But you can help mitigate a lot of that by using the right tool and doing doing the right, doing your homework, I should say, your due diligence, and running those pilots, and going through the reports. And if you don't do those things, as we used to tell our kids when they were younger, you get what you get, and don't throw a fit.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. The worst, and this occasionally happens. Where someone's run a migration, there hasn't been that same level of transparency, and 2 months later, the client phones up and says, "Hey, where's this file? This is a mission critical file for us, and it's
yeah,
not here. Why is it not here? What happened to it?" And if you're in a situation where you literally hold out your hands and go, "I don't know," is not the right answer, right? So,
yeah,
whereas when you've seen that file hasn't transferred, and why that has, or email hasn't transferred, why that's a problem, and you fixed it while you're doing the process, you avoid that phone call 2-3 months later, going, "Hey."
right. Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because sometimes there are critical files that maybe you're not using all the time, the client's not using all the time, and they think everything is good, and bam, there's that, "Hey, haven't used this file in a long time, but it is critical." And if you don't have that visibility from that process, then there's not much you can do, and you are in a bad position with that client. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, Colin, before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little about something that's new at MoveBot. I heard that you've added GCC high support for SharePoint, and this is huge. I mean, absolutely huge for government-focused MSPs, and it's a great offer for new partners, right?
Absolutely. It's something that we've been asked for a little bit of time, and we obviously we're here to talk about MoveBot, obviously, in our migration tool, but we also have CouchDrop, which is also really useful for MSPs, which is our managed file transfer via SFTP tool. And we had a number of, obviously, when you're transferring business critical files on that sort of transactional basis,
Yeah.
CouchDrop is absolutely the platform that you want to use. And within that, we were transferring into, or we're being asked to transfer not only into SharePoint but into GCCI. So we built the connection for GCCI for CouchDrop to meet those needs of those end clients, and so it was a natural progression for the engineering team here to be able to enable that in MoveBot, which is huge for MoveBot and for doing these migrations. So not only are we transactionally sending data into via CouchDrop into GCCI, now we're able to migrate into between out of GCCI environments. So yeah, it really is a nice addition for MSPs in that space.
That's awesome. And you guys have a special offer for MSPs that want to try you guys out. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. What we're happy to do, especially for new MSPs, is we'll happily provide 20 mailbox credits and 500 gig of data for everything MSP listeners. And happy, all you need to do is sort of jump into and register an account, ideally, hopefully, first at admin.movebot.io/register. And drop us an email at sales@movebot.io just to let us know that you heard about it through Everything MSP and our partnership with Everything MSP.
That's awesome. We appreciate that. And Colin, you've given us a lot of great advice today. Some of the key takeaways that I've identified, of course, migrations don't have to be risky when it's approached in a methodical way. testing with pilot users builds that confidence and reduces those surprises you talked about. Thirdly, clear, visible reporting is going to give MSPs that control and credibility. And we all know that that's the name of the game. Clients have high expectations, and we got to meet and exceed them. But owning that process builds the client trust and the recurring revenue, which is critical for us to keep the lights on. And we're all in here to make profit, right? Let's face it, it's reality.
Absolutely.
With the right tools, migrations can be a powerful growth opportunity. And well, with that being said, Colin, as always, it's great chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time today. And for all of our listeners, thank you so much for being here today. Until next time, everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.